Okay, greetings everyone. Jumbo. Welcome to another Afro literacy development session. We're doing culturally rich literacy practices for anyone who's educational professionals, from mamas to homeschool collab to teachers. So whatever your practice is, this is tried and true over my last 20 years in education. And so I always like to start, what is Afro-literacy and why do we have this term? For me, for my teaching from public school at the middle school level to the detention center to homeschool virtual, homeschool in person from K to 12. These are the tried and truths that have helped me to push scholars who are there, they got it, who may be like on an honors and advanced level, and to get scholars engaged who may have some challenges with literacy, depending on what gaps exist. And so these are the four pillars that I infuse into my curriculum. Of course, the African centered worldview. How do we function in the world in a traditional context? What is the student bringing into the classroom? How can we strengthen scholarly analysis and advocacy, that their voice heard? And how do we show this, display this in a creative way? So, and, if we were to publish it, some people can go on to say, I want to use my teachings to do this, and incorporating just real life application. And so that's my Afro literacy. And so we're going to go ahead and get started for today. My background, I have a PhD in curriculum development, master's in interdisciplinary studies. I'm a certified K through 12 teacher. And in 2010, without being certified, I was the district's reading teacher of the year simply by using Afro literacy. I didn't have whatever the training was, whatever they wanted me to do. I used good old African centered love and interest in the children. And that has got me success. So I always like to see who's checking in. Please check in the chat. Let me know your name, your profession, your business. There's always ways to link up, always ways to share. Age group and literacy needs. I'll be developing these videos probably for the next couple of years because I want to leave all that I've gained so that it can benefit our children. So please check in and let me know who's watching the videos. Okay, let's get started. This is about nonfiction, and we say unearthing stories. It's important to know that even when we are telling our scholars, dealing with them about research, about reading, there's his story versus our story. We know that, right? That is how we get different stories of, oh, Lincoln freed us and different things like that. And, the Native Americans and the false story of Thanksgiving. That's how our Black Wall Street is omitted, and that's how a lot of Black prominent figures are whitewashed in stories because it's his story versus our story. And so the reason why we want our scholars just really diving into their scholarship is nonfiction is based on a proverb. Until the lion learns to write, the story will always glorify the hunter. And we want to change that narrative so we can stop repeating the stories that the hunter has written. And we want to go into our lion phase. And so this is the book that I'll be publishing in reference to the nonfiction. And so I'm working on having these readily available so that we all can rise and grow and shine together when it comes to teaching our children. And so the first part of this is, of course, the theory, the background information. And so we want to make sure that we are teaching our scholars to regain storytelling. That's all our story history is someone's accounts of what happened. And we take that in and we add our journey to it. I mean, we want our scholars to be strong in that sense. And so we want to be able to control the narrative. We want to be able to shape the stories that are told in the future generations. We want to leave out distorted perspectives. We do not want to, we want to empower and tell our stories not as the victim at all times. And iEducation does a very powerful workshop series on how to retell our stories based on stories that have been given to us. And so it's very wonderful. If anyone is really interested in how to read story, iEducation is a great place to check that out. The founders of that school, they're very instrumental in that. And so again, this is about ensuring that our voices are heard in our voice, you know. Our voices are heard, not just simply repeating what we've been told, but it's in our voice, written in our culture, written in our story perspective. And so we don't want our experiences to be diminished. And so we want our truth, wisdom, contributions to shine bright because that's important for us and the future generations. And so nonfiction gives us the tool for that, to say, okay, this is not just a creative story, but this is the story that we know, that we can touch, that we can leave, that's written in stone. And we want to make sure that we become those lions, our scholars become the lions to tell their side of the story, and that a lot of our stories are not told from people outside of our culture. And so the tools, giving those tools to our scholars is very important to make sure that is happening less and less and less. And so reading nonfiction is all about critical thinking, media literacy, because we want to empower our scholars to be able to dissect, to write, and to be able to discuss. And so that is the very important foundation of this workshop today. And so a lot of it starts with this test that I have developed for my scholars called the Scholar Test. We used to use the craft test. Um, is it current? Is it reliable? Who wrote it? Do they have authority? And what's the purpose? In order to reclaim my stories, I took it a little bit deeper using the same foundation. Of course, talking about who is the author, what are their credentials, how credible are they? Of course, you want to look for evident facts. What are the statements that they are using? It's not just because they went to Harvard or they went to whatever our society deems as this prestigious school, but who are they? Who are they? Really looking at who they are as a person. What do they stand for? What evidence and facts are they using? We know we had, going up through time, we had all kinds of evidence that said something about the size of Black people's brains, and people that want to escape enslavement had this kind of disease, drapetomania. I think it's called, for people wanting to escape enslavement, and that's pure craziness. So we have to take a closer look before we take on someone's story. We have to say, who are these people? What do they stand for? um what information are they providing? Does that make sense? And so when we get to H, helpfulness, like how helpful is this article to what I am talking about? And we're going to be looking at this in not from just an individual perspective, but a community perspective, a cultural perspective. That is the difference in the deeper learning. It's nothing that's isolated. It's in relation to something else. So when we go to O, objective, what is the reason? What are they trying to accomplish with this? Are they trying to stereotype a group of people? Are they really trying to help us? And that's important, especially in medical facts. And we want our scholars to be able to look at that. Is this information up to date? Information changes all the time, especially now. We want to make sure that it is the latest information based on what we know and what we experience. And the last two I think is very important is like, is it African centered? Meaning, is it worldview? Is it effective for the people in the diaspora? Does it cover our experience historically, socially, sociologically? And what is the reputation of this person or this organization when it comes to the story of our people? What is the relationship? Do they go and observe, write down, and tell it through their perspective, which is totally different? That's a very, very important thing to understand before we say that we're going to use this in our research. We're going to really take in what they're saying, and so that's very important. So that is the scholar test. That is the scholar test. And I've done the scholar test with middle scholars and high scholars. And so this can be very effective once they practice it. they'll master it and they can begin to see like all sources are not good sources. I don't care where they're from. I think the first time I did it with my middle scholars, we found, I think it was a Caucasian woman who had a master's in um, Black women's studies. And so it's like, okay, she can read the books and everything else, but the experience, where's the experience? She can only say what she know from the books. And we know book versus real life, that's a totally two different opposite things. So it's important to really have our scholars examine that. So when you get the Nearpod, you will have access to this folder. And this folder, if you have a scholar that's trying it for the first time, there'll be an example of what we did. We went to this source on Fannie Lou Hamer and we found out, okay, Deborah Michaels has his PhD. We said, okay, she's a little qualified. She has she knows she's research history about African American women. We don't see what she's accomplished though in this field. And if we're going to use her as the forefront, we would do a little bit of digging, but there's some other things that we need to consider. So we said, okay, she's somewhat qualified in that area. And so we still scroll down, credibility, there's reference to other sources and different things like that. So they said, okay, somewhat credible. Then helpfulness. It was someone helpfulness to what we were trying to discover, but we noticed that there was some oppressive language. And when we talk about oppressive language, having our scholars get good with that and recognize that is very important. I know at my son's school we don't use the term masters or slaves. All of that is thrown out the window. You have prisoners of war and different things like that. So paying attention to how words are important. I do have a session that I do on the power of our words that I will record eventually. Because it's very important that we just begin to look at the power of our words. And I always think about the New Orleans when they had the flooding, the levees broke. And they had an article where they had a white person with a loaf of bread and says, local man finds a loaf of bread amidst the flood. And then they had a picture of a black man. It was like local man is something like loots or steals a loaf of bread. And so we want to make sure that we are looking out for oppressive language. And, that lessens the strength of that source. Because again, when we retell our stories, when we're analyzing, we want to make sure that we're showing up strong and that we're not telling our stories in someone else's language. And so we look at the objective. So they'll look at what is the reason for the site. It was to tell her life. And she presented mostly facts, so it's very suitable in that area. Then we go down, okay, it is current. I mean, it was 2017, about 7 years ago. There could have been some more information, updated information. So we give that about 3 points. And so when we look at, okay, is it African centered? Okay, it did focus on her experience. There was some bias there, though, in the words that were used, and it wasn't diverse. It was just this one white woman who had this degree in African American studies. So it has some limitations. So we would talk about that. Again, if it's not our voice should be at the forefront of the stories that we tell, our experience. Is no amount of studying and degree that is going to supersede the experience that we have as Black people and to tell that story in our own way. And so when we look at relationship or reputation, it talks about what is the history of that organization when it comes to that. And we want to look and see, who do they have on their staff that can, confirm what we're reading, who can add our voice and different things like that. And we want to make sure that we are exploring those things. And so at the bottom, it asks you, the scholar test, add up your points. Now, to pass, if it's more than 28 points, okay, great, use it. That's one of your strongest sources. If it's less than 28 points, you may want to use some additional sources, not have that at the forefront, or be able to explain limitations, because we don't just say throw it out all together based on two phrases that two very good Babas and sat in that class. One is we don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. We take the baby, we take what we can use, give it the bathwater. And two, even a broken clock is right twice a day. So there are some things that we can use, but it may not be the central focus of what we're talking about, again, because it's not written in our voice. So that is the Scholar test. Again, you will have access to that example and that worksheet to go over that with your scholar. And so moving on, let me see if I can make it bigger again. All right. So moving on, also in this worksheet, you will have access to this sheet right here. Take it to full screen again. You will have access to this sheet right here, which goes over everything I've talked about, why it's important, the Scholar test. So now we're going to look on this sheet, and I'm not going to go through everything, but you will see that there are some general things for analyzing nonfiction. Of course, we talked about the Scholar test. So you have that in there larger. We're going to talk about let me scroll down. We are going to talk about, there's another sheet, critical thinking, critical questions. But these are just some basic things that you can do when your scholar is reading something of nonfiction. So you will have access to this sheet. And now we're going to go into something that I call the Afrnificent 7 reading strategies, something that can be used over and over again. And again, the emphasis of is on whatever your final project is. If it's a paper, an essay, we want to make sure we slow down the journey and that the scholars take advantage of the journey to the essay or the final project. Because the more they do during the journey, the easier it is to get to that final. And we will do a session on writing in another workshop. So going back here, I think I have it up already here. So going back here, we are going to talk about the Magnificent Seven strategies or the Afronificent Seven strategies. So in my time in a public school, this has been one of the most amazing, I would say, reading strategies that is given to me by Dr. Richard Staten and Tiffany. I have to, my apologies. I don't remember her last name. Tiffany Johnson, or I think it's Tiffany Johnson. Very wonderful strategy. And it talks about the 7 essential reading comprehension strategies. I did one for nonfiction in November. And so now for fiction in November, and now I'm doing this one for nonfiction. So we want to make connections, ask questions, visualize, help them infer, determine importance, synthesize, and monitor comprehension. So this is a support system for all learning styles. Their ability will vary, and that's okay. But if they can do those 7 things, then they are great to go ahead and dissect. And so what I did was take those strategies out of isolation and put them into a cultural context, and so you have this bookmark, you will have this bookmark on your paper. It's also linked in this presentation. And now I'm going to go over those 7 strategies a little bit more deeply. So we have making connections. The basic things we have is when they're reading, they go through, this reminds me of, it made me think of, I read another book where this is different from. So that's on your basic level. When we are talking about making sure that we are writing in our voice, discovering in our voice, we want to make connections to our experiences and the community. That's the bigger concept, not just another text, another story, another video, but we want to say, how does this relate to my community experiences? How is my community talking about this topic? Because that is important. We have people that give us information all the time, especially in the media. And as we see in critical thinking, that serves them more than it serves us. So we want our scholars to be thinking about, how does this affect the community? How does it react? And how does this relate in the community? And so again, when you are looking at that, this works in conjunction with the Scholar test to look at who's giving us this information, because it may contradict what I'm seeing in my community, and that's important. Our experiences are so important, and we don't want someone else's self-proclaimed or institutional or society proclaimed scholarship to override that. That's the proverb. Only African people can solve African problems. This we have to do that for ourselves, and it comes by examining our own story and current situation. So going on to asking questions, basic thing, what is the author talking about? What's the message? What do they mean? Does the author explain this clearly? We want to examine it from a point of not just looking at isolated facts, but is there a bias that exists in this information? And again, asking questions, going through the scholar test. All right. Are the claims supported by evidence, or do they reflect stereotypes, one-sided views? What is the author's message about who I am, who my people are, no matter what your culture is? What is the message that they see? You have to ask. You have to ask those questions. Is there bias? Is it balanced? Does it represent our experience? Um, does it honor the diverse voices, or do they have a single story of who we are as a people? Because we are very diverse, and we want to make sure that the information reflects that. And so again, some of the same questions that we have in the scholar test, we want to break that down and really, really, really assess that before we decide, yeah, I'm going to use this source to tell the story of my people. Visualization is very, very, very important. Again, slowing down the journey, making mind maps, doing timelines, charts and graphs, infographics. And we'll talk about annotation in a few moments. And then having conceptual diagrams, you know, and the scholars are very great in using some of the apps listed below. MindMeister, Canva is so amazing. I love it. Let them visually represent the information that they're learning. It'll help them analyze better. So there are some other things you can do. Canva, Adobe Spark is another great one. And then you can do something as simple as Google Slides. Let them map out the information, and again, have the journey there so that when they get to their finished product, it's easier. Okay. So inferences sometimes they take a little bit more time to read between the lines because we're given so much. Everything is marketing, from education to the things that we buy. It's all about marketing. And so we want to train our scholars to look at context clues to make sure they're bringing in their prior knowledge, looking at the intents by asking those questions, looking at the evidence that's being examined. And we'll get into a little bit of critical thinking in a moment. So emphasis let us look at what is not said. And that's different important. That's very important. Those different strategies are very important, again, to spot biases. Okay. And so again, when we're looking like, what cultural values does this text represent? Because we read a lot of stuff and it's based on Eurocentric culture. It is not based on our culture, and it may not serve us well. And we want our scholars looking for that before we do something that's contra to the things that we need. The other strategy is determining importance. At the you have the basic level is, what's the big idea? What's most important here? This is what I've learned. This is important because. So you want them to be able to discover those questions. At the bottom, there are 5 basic ways to determine importance. You have keyword summaries, like what words stand out in your mind about what you have read. And once you get your words, you say, what are the important ideas associated with these words? And then once you finish that, you put them all together to summarize the passage. Another way is about point. You just have a simple, and I do have a worksheet for that. If anyone is interested, you put about, what is this? What I'm reading, what is it about? And then what are the main points? That's another way to quickly determine importance. We have the $2 summary. If it's like a quick and dirty, it's kind of like maybe like an elevator pitch for what elevator pitch for what you have learned. $2. You got $2. Every word costs 10 cents. How can you summarize this without going over your $2? Symbols and keywords. If you have a scholar that's visual, as they read the information or as they listen to the information, because we know there's information that comes in videos. What symbols are standing out in your mind and what words are standing out in your mind? And then once you have fulfilled, have a page full of all the information, now tell me what this text was about based on what you have drawn. And if there's a text with subheadings, you can turn the subheadings into a question and then find the answers to questions. So those are some basic, the 5 simplest ways to have scholars determine importance. And I'll be doing individual videos on these in the future. So critical thinking. That's another important one. And I'm going to switch back over for a second. So make sure we are covering things in order. And so, yes, we're going to come back to, okay, annotation. Um, Let me do critical thinking first. So let's go back to critical thinking and then we'll jump back to annotation. So yes, because that's the part of synthesizing. Our last one. Okay. So synthesizing, taking all of your information, all of your experiences, all of your relationship with this text, you're going to take that and you're going to synthesize. And that has to do with really thinking about what you've read, what you've heard, what you've experienced. And here's some questions that you can always ask after you read the information. Who benefits from this? Who is this harmful to? What are the strengths and weaknesses? Where we see this in the real world, the real world being in our community, not wherever they're telling us that this works best. Where do we see this in the real world? When is this acceptable or unacceptable? When would this benefit our society? What would cause this problem? Why is this a problem or a challenge? Really understanding, because we know a lot of times in our society, the problem is created and the problem is solved and someone benefits, and sometimes it's not us. So we really want to do this. How is this similar to? And with these, you can create strips, cut them up. And whenever the scholar has to read something, just take a strip out of a bucket, a basket, a bag, and have them be able to answer and talk about this. So that gives us on the a deeper conversation level to really analyze this. And I love this. This was done by the Global Digital Citizen Foundation. And so this is a really great tool for that. I appreciate them for putting it together. So now we are going to move into annotation. So those are the 7 Afr-nificent strategies, looking at things on a deeper level. So now we're going to talk about annotation. And I will probably do a class on this later as well for annotation. So when we look at annotation, we want to have a passage, and this could be done on a physical form, or it can be done on Google Doc, where we take an article and we copy it and then paste it. We choose the different colors to highlight, and then we do comments for your text. Annotation, when I tell my scholars, it has something to do with highlighting and having thoughts on the paper. It's a process. It doesn't have to all happen at one time. You can have a text, and the text I use is either something that I feel like my scholars need to learn. I'll choose a topic instead of just telling them that these are some best techniques for this. I'll let them read about it. Or another strategy for them to read is to do something that they're interested in. And this is a great way. Those are 2 great ways to train them for deep scholarship, right? And so there are 7 different ways to annotate. You can annotate using a Magnificent 7. They can take a day, one passage, and say, okay, today we're going to annotate for making connections. Every time you find a connection, you can relate it to something in community. You're going to highlight and say, this reminds me of, or this is like this. You can take a day to do questions. So again, whatever level that your scholar is on, that is how the annotation occurs. And so some more technical things that you can annotate for is unfamiliar vocabulary. highlighting a vocabulary word and taking a guess as to what that word means. And I will have a session on just vocabulary coming as well. And so when we're looking at the nonfiction side, they can highlight as they get more technically skilled and up in high school. They can highlight for point of view. What's the tone? What's the style? What's the structure? What is the hook, thesis, main points? So this is kind of on a higher level. Once you get into the high school level, and this is a great sheet that I did love for the high school, one high school that I taught with in Henrico County in Virginia. I really, really love this method of starting with the basic making connections. Can they do that at the middle school level? Can they start to annotate with that? Can they start to annotate at critical thinking? And then get into the high scholar level is, can they identify point of view, tone? And all of these will help them get to the end result. There's figurative language at the bottom. The end result to having a discussion paper or whatever the project is. So this is the annotation sheet that they can use. Again, can be used over and over and over, can scaffold it. Very great tool. And to facilitate that learning process, there's a rubric. And I love this rubric because it tracks progress. Again, the first time they annotate is not going to be perfect. And that's okay because they have something that they're looking forward to. And sometimes I will have them rubric themselves, so they start here at the rubric and they trace their process. I've done this for up to 9 weeks, seeing students 2 or 3 times a week. But again, how the student develop, that's on their own. This is a great tool. Is the text marked or do they look like they just marked the beginning and just skim over the rest? Is it organized? Can you read where they highlighted and where the thought process goes to? Having your notes very organized is very important. Are they, reading, showing that they're carefully reading? Is their thought process evenly dispersed? Um, do they have, every time they've highlighted somewhere, do they have some kind of deeper level of thinking? And that can be versus this reminds me of something I read that's very general versus this reminds me of a news article that I saw that discussed X, Y, and Z. So they need to be reaching for that high level thinking. Do they identify vocabulary words? Do they try to take a guess at their meaning based on context clues? Figurative language is great out here because we didn't start with figurative language right away. And so you can change the rubric, gray out the areas that you're not going to use, and the rubric grows with your scholar. Again, here. I had not gotten to every single thing on the annotation list, but these are the things I'm looking for. So this rubric can really, really grow with your scholar. And depending on where we were, I changed this number, to give them like an 80% rating on the rubric. So this is a great way to have your scholar grow with annotation. And this is something that they can do for a whole year. So I absolutely, absolutely love it. So getting back here to finish up with this, you have your rubric. Let it grow with your scholar. And it's a great activity. Some things in this plan, the last few pages, again, you can look through this when you have the presentation and you can click on the links. Here, if you have fourth or fifth graders, there's a Kamali Academy suggestion of reading resources that you can do. There's a main idea graphic organizer to help them with determining importance. And then there's a main idea rubric. So if you have a scholar that's kind of upper elementary, early elementary, they can focus on the Magnificent Seven. Can they make connections? Even if you want to do connections, questions, determine importance, just what is right for your scholar. And as they get older, they'll go into really, really cannot pick out the main idea. So there's a very good resources for that you'll be able to click on. If your scholar needs help with inferencing, there's an activity that I do with personalized license plates. And so if your scholar needs help with reading between the line, there is an e-reading worksheet here, which I love e-reading. You can discover that. There's vocabulary, there's all kind of worksheets there for other topics that is very helpful in e-reading. There's a making inferences video here. And after you do that, you can go into the making inferences um, project, which is very, very, very fun. I really enjoy it. And so it's just like interview someone, get some background information on them, and it's kind of like working backwards. Now, I want you to create a license plate for them and see how the information that you research connects to this license plate. And a license plate is how we work backwards, to making inferences. This has worked with my middle scholars. So this would be great for upper elementary to help them with inferences. From middle school, I've put the original Magnificent Strategy PowerPoint if you need to have the basic level as done by the district. So that is there to go back before you get to the deeper community levels. And of course, there is a main idea sheet, additional reading strategy sheet. So those are all there. Also for middle schools, middle scholars, there is the 50 African sheets, 50 Africans book, which is so wonderful for learning to annotate. And you just learn about a different Black scholar in history, and you can start making connections. The same thing that I said. So it's a great way to have short passages about our people that students can annotate and check their comprehension skills. So I do love starting with this with middle school. Again, here's the links on annotation. And another way that I have them do making inferences and reading nonfiction is by doing what's called the fake book project, or now we do like a Google page for people that have existed in our history. And so that's a great way to do inferences, because if they were to have this website page, what would it look like based on your information? And so that's also a great way to think about what they have read. So that's a wonderful activity. And annotating. This goes over for high scholars, examples of how to annotate. Everything is here. There is a folder for a list of Black books and authors to read, a reader's guide to annotation, and then there's a pro-conscious bundle with also some suggested books. The rubrics attached here again, and short responses, the CREX model, which I will go over when we have the reading class. So these are a bunch of additional resources that you all can use. So have fun with that. This will be linked down at the video. So to close, my top 10 tips for having students engage in nonfiction reading is connected to real life experiences. How is what they're reading going to relate to the bigger picture in their life? Using visual aids, always asking questions, making inferences, having a discussion, using the critical questions to encourage discussions, offer context, that type of thing. Offer context to what you are doing. Let me go back. Hope it won't stop me at the beginning. So offer context to what you are doing. So all of those things are very, very, very important. Those top 10 are at the bottom of your sheet. And so I'm always here if y'all have questions. Again, the link is here for our YouTube. This is the storytelling, but this is also where I will be putting all of the mini lessons. So look out for those so you can get an update when we do have the mini lessons. Um, Other things, if you need to, this is our main website here. I will be redoing the education website. So I would love to have your feedback. What do you need in your education process? So this is our main workshop, our main website. The link is here to you can register for other Afro-literacy. And then there are other things, newsletter, one-to-one curriculum calls. So ways to stay in touch. I would love to hear from you. I hope this was helpful. Please let me know your feedback. And I look forward to on this continual journey of Afro-literacy for our scholars. Until next time, Odabo.